I just want to welcome everybody to this facility. This isn't an area that many people have been in before. It's one of our 4 or 5 primary centers that we operate and provide educational opportunities for. So on behalf of the college, and I'd also like to introduce Art Ebersberger, one of our board of trustees. So on behalf of our board, who helped sponsor this and look for these opportunities that we're providing and working with the community, I'd like to welcome you to Anne Arundel. We are your local partner as far as workforce development, leadership development, actually any kind of training that you might need within the facilities that you're coming from. And I looked over the roster, and we have people from small business, large business, people who've been in leadership for a long time. Looks like some people that might be moving into new leadership programs. So I really appreciate the fact that you've turned to us to come and investigate and look at some of your leadership needs. So we've partnered with Global Corporate College for this. We are an affiliate with Global Corporate. It allows us to expand our resources in a very collaborative manner. We have access to trainers that they have, and then we do training for them. So it's a nice reciprocity that we've got going on between us and Global Corporate, and Sonia is very, very involved in that endeavor. So I would like to thank you. This event's going to allow us to really take a look at diverse leadership and why we need to do it. When I got to Anne Arundel 2 years ago, I quickly learned that 59% of our administrative workforce was eligible to retire, 59%. And we didn't have any kind of succession planning in place. We weren't sure what we were going to do. We weren't sure how we were going to prepare. We weren't sure whether people had the leadership and the training opportunities. Hi, Ed. From Economic Development, one of our other partners. Thank you for coming. Anyway, so we took a look at what it is that we needed to do, and I'm really excited to announce, and we shared with the college community, we're getting ready to start a program called Lead AACC in the fall, which is going to be a 20-person cohort opportunity where we're going to look internally and develop our own leadership, because we're realizing that if we're going to really help our people move forward, it's good for our employees to know that we're committed to them, that we want to see them ascend and rank, that we want to invest in them, that we want their commitment, and we want to demonstrate our commitment in return. And it was interesting because in order to get ready for fall, we started doing some management training programs in the spring. Management's different from leadership. And we had over 100 people attending these various sessions on things like employee evaluations and how to deal with conflict in the workplace and how do you become more collaborative. So our workforce is very interested in this opportunity, and my guess is your workforce is interested in it as well. And as leaders coming into this particular program to take a look at what we have to offer today, my guess is that you're looking at your own leadership development and continued improvement as well. So on behalf of the college, I want to say welcome. I'm excited about this opportunity. Sonia puts on a lot of wonderful programs up here. And we hope that as you go through this program and you're starting to identify some areas for your personal growth or for the development and growth of your own employees, that you look to AACC to provide that trainingship opportunity for you right here within the county. We can come to you, you can come to us. We're very flexible, and we really do see ourselves as the economic driver of educational opportunities in the county for workforce development. So thank you.
So just to get us a little bit of information, Dawn had mentioned I am the Director of Sales and Solutions here at Anne Arundel Community College. Here at Anne Arundel, we partner with Global Corporate College. You've heard both of those. We use them interchangeably. They're one of our closest partners. We helped to find Global Corporate College back in 2007. It's a consortium of community colleges across the country and around the world. What it gives us the opportunity to do is to bring all of those resources here to our local community, as well as to outreach to any part of the world wherever your business takes you. So it multiplies us 2, 3, 4-fold. And so we're really excited today that we're able to bring you one of the resources that we share with Global Corporate College, which is some of their speakers and some of their talented experts. And today we have Dr. Laura Bernstein. We're really excited. She has done a lot in the area of leadership and development. I first met her several years ago when she was running her own company and CEO of Vision Point Technologies. She now serves as the Executive Vice President of Global Learning Solutions at Global Corporate College, and I'd like to welcome her here today. Thank you so much for coming, Laura.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Sonia. It's wonderful to be here with everyone as we have an opportunity to talk about strategic leadership. And what I'd like to do before we get started is take a quick poll and ask how many people here have heard of the term VUCA, V-U-C-A, VUCA. Okay, several people are raising their hand, but not everybody. So VUCA is something that has been around for quite a while. It is originally a military term that is now used to describe the 21st century business landscape. And it's characterized by 4 things: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And what I'd like to do is take just a moment and talk a little bit about each one of those things, because this is the world we live in. We live in a VUCA world. So when we talk about volatility, we're talking about the nature and the dynamics of change, specifically the pace of change. So we're going to talk a lot about change today, and I know that change is not a new topic for anyone sitting in the room, but it's extremely important to all of us as leaders and the people within our organization to understand the current concept of change, the drivers of change, and what makes the VUCA world a VUCA world. When we look at uncertainty, we're talking about the unpredictable and unreliable conditions that each of us and everyone within our organizations need to deal with on a day-to-day basis. When we're looking at complexity, we're talking about multifaceted issues. All of the conditions, all of the situations that come together, the confounding of these issues. And the impact on all of us when we go to make decisions is that we often need to weigh competing influences. And it's the pace and the pervasiveness of the complexity that's important. The last one, which is ambiguity, when we think about the word ambiguous, in this context, it really refers to the unknown significance of one or more factors in a particular situation. And the conditions basically lead to multiple interpretations. So we're in situations and everyone is looking at the situation a little bit differently. So VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it kind of lays the landscape for what we're going to talk about. So I'm not going to talk in any great depth about VUCA and the concept of VUCA. It's been around for quite a while, even though it's new to many of us. But what I am going to be talking about is what that means to us today in leadership development. One thing that's important to also talk about as it relates to VUCA is the drivers. So what makes the VUCA world the VUCA world? So there are economic drivers, things like globalization, capital markets, fluctuating trade cycles, just rapidly evolving business models would be another economic driver. There's also other types of drivers, things like government regulations, disruptive technologies, the social media aspects, and everything that we're talking about contributes to sort of this unrelenting instability and chronic uncertainty and complexity. So these are the drivers of the VUCA world. Now there's lots of implications. We live in this constantly changing VUCA world. So VUCA itself is not a constant. It is also constantly changing. And when we, again, talk about change, what we're most concerned about is the pace of change and the pervasiveness of change. And what happens is we as leaders and everyone in the organization with us, as we're going through whatever changes are happening, we often find ourselves in what we called uncertainty paralysis. Indecision, inaction, we can't move. So what's important is understanding the drivers of change, which we will talk about in just a few minutes, and then developing some new skills. So that's the sort of so what? Why do we even care about this? So today, we don't have a lot of time to go into depth on any one area or even the 10 skills that we're going to talk about. But what I do want to do is give you an opportunity to sort of get a breadth of information. So we're going to talk about 6 drivers of change. We're going to talk about 5 leadership development trends that are happening right now. And then we're going to talk about 10 new skills. And my goal is that everyone in the room will be able to walk out with at least one nugget, one thing that you can say, I want to explore this further, or this is something that is meaningful to me and my organization, and we need to be thinking about this as it relates to our strategic objectives, or one thing that you are compelled to learn more about. So just one nugget. And if we can get that one nugget, I'm going to feel like we had a productive session today. So you see a picture here of some people whitewater rafting. How many people have either gone whitewater rafting or canoeing on the Boundary Waters or something like that? Lots of people. Okay. So what does whitewater rafting have to do with the VUCA challenge and the change that we're talking about? I'd like to share two very quick personal stories with you. Several years ago, I was rafting on the Youghiogheny River in Pennsylvania. And the action was class 3-4 waves, which would be considered an intermediate level type of a river, for those of you who really understand the technical components of the river. I was not in great shape, and either were any of the other 4 people that were in my particular raft. So we're in the raft, we're having fun, we're paddling, we're doing all the things that you learn in the 10 minutes prior to going out in the raft that they tell you about. And one of the things they tell you about is if you fall out of the raft, you need to make sure that your feet are downriver. And that seems like a pretty easy thing to do. We all know what downriver is. So of course, I fall out of the raft. And in my head, I say, feet downriver, feet downriver, feet downriver. But I was disoriented, and the water was fast, and I had uncertainty paralysis. I couldn't get my feet downriver. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, my head is going to hit a rock, which is the whole point of getting your feet downriver, is so that your head doesn't hit the rock, so that your feet hit the rock. And I can hear people yelling, feet downriver, feet downriver. What I needed to do was calm myself, get clear, and go with the flow. So go with the flow, as simple as it sounds, is actually one of the key concepts in leadership development as we talk about how we deal with the VUCA challenge. Going with the flow is actually not something that comes natural. It's actually a skill that we need to learn. We need to learn how to go with the flow. So going with the flow is extremely important. The second story, a few years later, I'm still not in great shape, but I'm in a one-person dinghy, so sort of like a kayak type of a raft. And there's several of us on the river. And the rapids were also intermediate, so 2, 3, 4 rapids. I got stuck in a hydrofoil. So a hydrofoil on a river is when the water is going up and down and up and down and up and down, and your boat is literally going underwater, over water, underwater, over water. And you're literally going under the water and over the water and under the water and over the water. What do? I panic. Uncertainty paralysis. I don't know what to do. I'm stuck in a hydrofoil. I'm panicking. Of course, in that 10-minute orientation, they tell you what to do, which is you need to shift in order to just, in order to move out of the exact position you're in so that the water hits your raft in a different position. So I'm not thinking about that because I need just-in-time training. I'm waiting for someone to say, shift, shift. In the end, I was able to get clear, get calm, go with the flow. I was able to shift my body and get myself out of this water. So going with the flow, getting calm, getting clear is extremely important as we talk about all of the skills related to moving forward in the VUCA world. So what does whitewater rafting have to do with our topic today, other than, it was a fun little story? Everything. In whitewater rafting, you need to be in shape, both physically and mentally. You need to be prepared. You need to be able to deal with volatile and uncertain conditions. You need to be able to adapt very, very quickly. So speed is extremely important as we talk about the VUCA world. So here's some perspective. Let's talk about speed for just a moment. Today, right now, in the last 5 minutes, as we have been sitting here, there have been 246,750,000 Google searches going on. While we have been sitting here in the last 5 minutes, 1,800,000 tweets have happened. And in fact, I would venture to say that somebody sitting here in this room is probably part of that 1,800,000. There have been 500 hours of video uploaded to YouTube in the last 5 minutes. And the list goes on. I've listed here just a few of the most common social media sites that many of us are probably familiar with, or at least we've heard of. But there are thousands more of social media sites. So what we need to do for perspective is keep in mind that this VUCA landscape in which we live is all about speed, it's all about pace, and it's all about the culmination of the 4 conditions: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So change is an extremely important component of this, and change is not something that is new to any of us. But what is new is that pace and just the pervasiveness of change. Now, before we look at the 6 drivers, the 6 current drivers of change, let's consider a few things. The first prediction that you see listed here comes from the 2013 U.S. Labor Report. By 2020, there will be 10% fewer senior leader positions available than in 2010. And this is just in the United States. Yet the total workforce is expected to grow at least 5%. So just take a moment and reflect on what that might mean for your own workforce and your own organization. The second bullet comes from a study where researchers were looking at how social media and other technology-driven tools provide greater access to job opportunities. So it's a fact that leaders are now facing increased competition as technology and globalization continue to drive an expanded talent pool. So reflect on what that might mean and put that together with the prediction. Now, the last bullet comes from commentary related to how today's development models, leadership development models, fall short in addressing future organizational needs. And this speaks to organizations and corporations inside their learning and development, training, performance improvement departments, as well as for those of us on the learning provider side, the community colleges, the learning vendors. And the challenge is that there's a growing concern among senior leaders and learning and development professionals that skills needed for future success are lacking in today's workplace competency and leadership models. So the bottom line is that we need to be ready. We need to learn how to go with the flow, and we need to be ready to live in this world today and tomorrow where leaders must rapidly advance their skills. Rapidly. Rapidly is the key word. And it's critical for us to focus on future work skills, not basic work skills. So let's talk about why. What are the 6 drivers of change? Now, the Institute for the Future out of Palo Alto, California, and the University of Phoenix Research define these 6 drivers of change. And they describe them as disruptive shifts that are likely to impact the future of leadership development, how we lead, how we run, how we operate our businesses. So let's think about what a disruptive shift is. Let's make sure everyone knows what a disruptive shift is. And what I'd like to do is use the telephone as an example, because I think, does everybody use a telephone of some sort? I mean, everybody uses a telephone. So we can all relate to a telephone. Well, there was a time when there was no telephones. And so when the first telephone, which was more in the form of a switchboard type of a thing, was invented, that was a disruptive shift. That was completely different. It allowed people from far away to communicate with each other. That was a disruptive shift in how people get along, how they communicate, how businesses operated, how we run our personal lives. So that's a disruptive shift, just the invention of the telephone. Then we had the capability, we assimilated that telephone so that every single person could have a telephone in their house. In fact, you could have more than one telephone in your house. So that was another disruptive shift. Then we had the invention of the cell phone or a mobile device. That was another disruptive shift. And it allowed us to communicate and completely be with our phone at all times. Then we had the invention of the smartphone, which probably most of us have, or many of us have. And the smartphone has actually allowed us to be completely plugged in 24/7 if we want it to be. Now, we can debate whether that's a good idea or not, but the idea is that this is a disruptive shift. And you can just look at one very small thing, the telephone. And so these 6 drivers of change are being described as what will cause disruptive shifts on an ongoing basis in the next 10, 20, 30 years. So the first one is extreme longevity. Basically, we have increasing global lifespans. We're all living longer. And that is going to cause a disruptive shift. The very simple one that we can probably, most of us can relate to is just more people staying in the workplace longer. The second one has to do with the rise of smart machines and systems. We have this heightened integrated automation. The third one, the computational world. We have this massive increase in sensors, processing power, and just the amount of data that is available to us each and every day, and our ability as human beings to take that data in, turn it into useful information, and run our businesses is just mind-boggling. The next one is new media ecology. And this is really the development of a new vernacular for communication. This is all about social media. And for many of us, social media is something that we play with. But social media is something that businesses are now being run by. And it's extremely, extremely important as a driver of change. The next one is superstructured organizations. This has to do with creating extreme, large-scale structure by tapping into the social connection that previously we didn't have resources for, and it was completely unattainable. So we've all been a part of needing to scale our organizations, but we're talking about extreme scale through social media and through technology. And then the last one is just our globally connected world. Greater integration across geographic borders is one of those drivers of change. So if we take all of these drivers of change and we look at this specific to learning for leaders, we have 5 leadership trends. Now, the Center for Creative Leadership, located in North Carolina, reports 2 things as being the most critical elements in future leadership development. 2 things. The first one is speed, and the second one has to do with environmental adaptation. Our ability to adapt quickly to whatever the circumstances are, make decisions quickly, and then do something that will impact our organizations positively. So the 2 things that they're reporting have to do with speed and adaptation. And what I'd like to do is look at each of these 5 leadership trends sort of under the umbrella of speed and adaptation. So let's take a look at the first one. Now, the leadership development imperative that is with each of us, so no matter what organization you're with, profit, nonprofit, doesn't matter, big, small, doesn't matter. Our leadership development imperative is currently to develop ourselves and to develop other leaders within our organization in the context in which they lead, within the context in which they lead. No longer can we take leadership development outside of that context. Now, that does not mean you can't go outside of a building or outside of a facility to do training. But the training itself needs to culminate and apply to something that is relevant to the leader inside that situation. VUCA situations, by their very nature, require a highly customized approach. Less time needs to be spent on the general competencies, and more time needs to be spent on very specific development stages that are relevant to each leader or each leader level within your organization. So some of us have, very highly structured, very large organizations where there are several layers and several leadership levels. And some of us are in smaller, medium-sized, flatter type organizations, and we have less levels, and it's more of a lateral leadership type of a framework or type of a structure. And this applies to either structure. There's still core roles and responsibilities that each leader has. And more time needs to be spent on each of those leaders individually. And then no matter what the training content is, that's not relevant. The strategic learning themes are sort of what I like to call the 5 C's. So they have to do with choices that leaders need to make. They have to do with clarity, getting clear about a particular situation. Compassion has to do with those interpersonal skills. And then change, of course, is big. We've been talking about that. And then courage is the 5th C. And that has to do with not finding yourself in uncertainty paralysis. You need to have the courage to know that you will be able to figure out whatever the answer is to whatever the given situation might be. Now, the next trend has to do with self-development. So this sort of comes from that customized development and thinking about leaders individually within the context in which they lead. Now, regardless of level, regardless of function, today's leaders, all of us sitting in the room and anyone within our organization, needs to take ownership, serious ownership, for our own personal development. We're moving away from HR and manager-driven initiatives, and we're moving more toward leader-led responsibility as it relates to leadership development. Now, this does not mean that there can't be a corporate initiative. This does not mean you can't have company-wide mandatory training. But what it does mean is that each individual leader needs to be responsible for what they need beyond those basic things. Now, 21st century leaders, that's all of us, must be learning leaders. And the concept of a learning leader is not new. A learning leader today means that we are incessantly studying and acting, not just studying, but acting upon all the things that are happening within our environment, all these uncontrollable things that happen, and we're acting upon them in a way that helps us advance our corporate values and expand our organizational-wide capability to provide us more knowledge, more understanding, and more ability to move forward with whatever our corporate goals might be. All of us, each of us as individuals, are responsible to expand our own personal capabilities. And this is regardless of job, regardless of level. Now, adaptation was one of those key things that came out of the Center for Creative Leadership. So the third bullet, a priority, has to do with adaptive challenges. So we live in this world where adaptive challenges are common and they are a priority. There are no clear choices in many situations. And often we find ourselves in a situation where our expertise, our experience, our knowledge, our understanding really don't apply. What applies is our ability to navigate and make decisions through experimentation, through risk-taking, through creativity, and through continuous learning. So it's our ability to learn the skills around experimentation, learn the skills around risk-taking, learn the skills around creativity, because we can't rely on 3 easy steps. So how many people here have kids or grandkids, nieces or nephews that are under the age of 6? Okay, several people. You may have heard of a TV show that airs on Disney Junior called Special Agent Ozo. Special Agent Ozo. It's not my favorite TV show, but I've seen a lot of it. Special Agent Ozo comes from outer space down to Earth to help children solve their problems. And all problems, just so you know, can be solved in 3 easy steps. Okay? You brush your teeth in 3 easy steps. You tie your shoes in 3 easy steps. We all know, however, that it is not 3 easy steps, that we live in a complex world, which is why Special Agent Ozo and I don't get along very well. So the last bullet has to do with agility. Now, how many of you have read about agile leadership or studied, how to make an agile workforce? Okay, a few people are raising your hand. Now, what's interesting about agile leadership today, which is a little bit different than 5-10 years ago when agile leadership started to be talked about, is that even our agility needs to be agile. Okay? We can't just be agile, we have to be even more agile. Leaders can't just look ahead, we need to look behind, we need to look to the side, we need to focus on our competition, we need to focus on the future, we need to focus on history. There's all these things coming together to help us make whatever the decisions are that we need to make. In this new normal that we live in, which is, achieving results despite reduced resources, okay? That's sort of the new normal that we live in. That's not going to go away. So for those of us who might be sitting here thinking, times will get easier, times will get better. Well, times will get better. They'll get better when we figure out that it's not going away. Because for those of us that are sitting here thinking times will get better because we're going to get more resources, that's not going to be the case. We're going to need to be able to leverage the resources we have and leverage technology. That's what the new normal is. So really what that boils down to for those of us that are leaders is leaders are actually fast becoming the key differentiator in our organizations. So the key point is the more agile we are as leaders, the more adaptive we become. The more adaptive we become, the more valuable we are. The more valuable we are to our internal organization, the more valuable we are to our external organization. And we need to do that by being agile. Now, the next trend has to do with organizational-wide leadership development and learning and development. So LD can be leadership development and learning and development. Now, over the last decade, there's been this ongoing debate. And the debate has been among senior leaders, presidents of companies, learning and development professionals, diversity professionals, HR professionals. And the debate has to do with the relevance of non-mandatory training. Non-mandatory training, which sort of is an oxymoron with VUCA in terms of us needing to be learning leaders, okay? So it doesn't really matter where you are on the debate, but for those companies that are dedicated to ongoing professional development, the challenge is really how do they afford the investment? It's not if they're going to do it, it's what they're going to focus on and what they're going to focus their money on. So again, regardless of where you sit on the debate, what can't be argued is that the leader's ability to learn is a major source of competitive strength. And so ongoing learning is something that needs to be spread throughout the organization. Now, there's two pictures here of two famous gentlemen. How many people know at least one, if not both, of these gentlemen? Okay, just a couple people in the room. So I get to tell you who these really cool individuals are. So the first gentleman on the right is the late Malcolm Knowles. He died in November of 1997. He is often considered the father of adult learning theory. Okay, so for those of us in education, he might be someone that we're familiar with. He influenced what's known as humanistic learning theory. The gentleman on the left is the late Masaru Abuka. Hope I'm saying that name right, Masaru Abuka. He died in December of 1997, a month apart, which is kind of interesting. He was Sony's CEO from 1950 to 1971, and then he was also chairman until 1976. So who cares? Who cares about these two individuals? Well, what's interesting, for those of us who've been in the learning and development industry for a while, we actually got to hear Malcolm Knowles speak about a story that is really, really important, I think, to everybody in the room related to Sony. And it had to do with how Sony prepared its workers for the invention of the transistor. So let's make sure we all know what a transistor is, okay? It's a fundamental component of modern electronic devices. It is in everything, okay? Everybody here in the room owns something, more than one something, that has a transistor in it, okay? Now, while all of the competitors were focused on the actual technology, the development of the technology, the development of the transistor, and everything about the technology, what Sony chose to do was focus on how to assimilate new technology. How do we assimilate our new knowledge and our new understanding of technology into whatever we're going to do in our business? There's a big difference. Competitors were focused on the actual technology and the development of the technology. Sony was focused on how do we assimilate this technology? How do we do something with this technology? And what they did was they invested in what probably at that time seemed like unrelated learning opportunities. They allowed every single person in their organization, not only allowed, but mandated every single person in their organization to be in some sort of learning activity. It could be learning how to cook. It could be learning a new personal interest. It could be learning to skydive. It could be learning some sort of sport. It also could have been something related to business. It didn't really matter. The mandate was they had to be involved in ongoing learning activity. So I'd like to read something to you. In an interview with Masaru Abuka, he said, "We knew learning was a skill. The more employees learned, the better learners they became. We knew continuous learning would make them more adaptive to new ways of manufacturing." Now, all of us sitting in this room know the punchline. Sony proved to its critics that learning to learn, regardless of the content, was a critical skill and a competitive advantage. And today, Sony still was, in the top 100 Fortune Global companies. I think they're like 94th in the Fortune Global companies. And it had to do with the fact that they did not focus on technology. They focused on assimilation, which had to do with, well, how do we take what we learn and assimilate it into our business model? So there's this huge emphasis on spreading leadership, resources, learning development resources across the organization for everyone and making learning a priority, putting people in a situation where they must learn to learn. They must learn to adapt. This is a skill. You don't just adapt, okay? You have to learn how to adapt. The next trend has to do with innovation, and you're gonna notice that all of these, start to have to do with each other. So there's lots of challenges today. We have demographics, we have globalization, we have international mobility, and all of these things contribute to this increasingly geographically dispersed and culturally dispersed organizational population. And so we need innovation in leadership development methods. Even small companies, for those of you in small companies, we require astute leaders to interact with diverse customers, diverse vendors, and the challenges of accelerated technology. Now, this pace of change, which leads to all of us needing to make fast decisions and decisions faster, then leads to this need to apply accelerated learning strategies. So we can no longer talk about should we not do e-learning. Okay? That's something we talked about 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago. There are organizations still today thinking about whether we should be thinking about e-learning. That is no longer a question on the table for organizations that want to be here 10, 20, 30 years from now. Because the question now is, how do we leverage technology? What's the best way to leverage existing and emerging technology? It's not if, it's what and it's how. The other thing that's kind of going away is talk about best practices. So I think several of us, I won't make you raise your hand. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but I'll raise my hand. I think about best practices. I like to think about what other organizations are doing and think about what the best practice is on a particular thing. But the bottom line for leaders today is there's a shift away from best practices to what I like to call context-rich practices. And that has to do with facilitating situations where learners need to make sense of whatever that situation might be. They need to invent what to do in the moment of doing it. And then they need to reflect on that situation while they're doing it and also in retrospect. So putting them in a situation where they need to learn to adapt. So it doesn't really matter what the best practice is because the VUCA world tomorrow looks different than the VUCA world looks today. In fact, in the last 5 minutes, all those Google searches and tweets and everything that we're talking about, there's another 1,800,000 tweets, and there's another X number of Google searches and Yahoo searches and all of those things. So this pace that we're living in requires us to not focus on best practices and in fact focus on context-rich practices, which is a key point for leadership development as we think about what learning opportunities there need to be for us. Now this last trend sort of puts them all together, and it's really looking at learning and leadership development as a competitive strategy and viewing it as a competitive strategy. So for those of you who are in organizations who cut learning, training, and development budgets when times get rough, you are not viewing learning as a competitive strategy. You might want to be viewing learning as a competitive strategy, and in your heart and in your own personal head, you might have a belief that learning is extremely important. But if you're in an organization that's cutting a budget on learning, then you're not viewing it from a business perspective as a key business strategy. Those organizations that are viewing it as a key business strategy put significant focus on innovation in leadership development methods, and they leverage technology to create connective leadership communities inside their organization and then external to the organization. They're experimenting. Experimentation is a key thing about today's leadership development. They're experimenting with diverse ideas. They're experimenting with learning approaches. They're experimenting with technology. Just the concept of experimenting allows you to learn the skill of adaptation. So adaptation is a skill you learn by applying it in a given situation. Bottom line, organizations of the future who view leaders as a competitive strategy and who view learning as a competitive strategy are going to be requiring their leaders to adapt quicker in shorter time frames than ever before. And they're going to be helping them do that very thing. So let's get to the meat. Let's talk about the actual skills. So the skills that you see listed here are what we like to call enduring leadership skills. These are skills that were here 10, 20, 30 years ago, and these are skills that I anticipate will be here 10, 20, 30 years from now. So these are not skills that are going away. So if there are people within the organization, your organization, that need to practice these skills and learn these skills, there's lots of opportunity to be learning these types of skills, and it makes sense to learn these types of skills because these would be the skills that are considered enduring. They're going to be with us for a while. But we're not going to talk about these in detail. Instead, let's move to another set of skills. Now, I talked a little bit about how VUCA really isn't new, but it's new to many of us, and how change isn't new, but the pace of change is new to us. These 10 new skills came out in 2007 in a report from the Institute for the Future. How many people have heard of all 10 skills? You recognize all 10 names. Okay, nobody's raising their hand. How about 9? How about 8? 7? 6? 5? 4? All right, 5 and 4. There's a few that are recognizing 4 or 5 of these. And if you think a little bit about them, some of their names might prompt you to think about what they might mean. So I'll just give a couple examples. So what's the ping quotient? The ping quotient has to do with responsiveness and reach. It's the ability to engage with people, to work within a network, not just build a social network, but to work within a network. It's a skill that has to do with a highly scaled network, responsiveness and reach. That's just one. That's just one of these skills. But I'm not even going to talk about the rest of the skills because these skills are old news. This is 2007. So we're even beyond these skills. These skills led to some more new skills. In 2008, 2009, the Institute for the Future put out 10 new skills. Now, some of these might sound a little bit more familiar. How many people have heard of at least 10? 10, all 10 skills. 9, 8. 8. We got one person for 8. 7? A few more. 6. Okay, 6. 5. Okay, so now people are starting to nod their head. And even if you didn't think about them as skills, you might be thinking, well, I know what sense making is. It means making sense. Making sense out of something. So you might have raised your hand for that one, and that's okay. Because the idea that the Institute for the Future came out with was, well, how do we take those 10 skills over here that didn't catch on, that are extremely important, and make them so that people will actually get them and want to do something with them. So they sort of moved themselves to these 10 skills. But we're not going to talk about these 10 skills either. Nope, let's go over here. So let's talk about these 10 new skills that came out in the book called Leaders Make the Future by Bob Johansen. He is a fellow with the Institute for the Future in Palo Alto. In 2007, he came out with a book called Get There Early, where he described the VUCA world. So for those of you who are thinking, well, VUCA, I've never heard of VUCA. In 2007, there was a book called Get There Early, but it was even before that in the military. But in 2007 is when businesses started to really talk about the VUCA world. And of course, we're in 2014. So in 2009, Bob Johansen came out with a book, Leaders Make the Future, and he came out with these 10 new skills. In 2012, he did an update to the book, and they're still the same skills, which is why we're going to focus on these 10 skills. These are now skills that have probably been talked about for the last few years. I've personally been talking about them for a few years, and I have several colleagues that are starting to implement and integrate these skills into their leadership development programs and into non-leadership development programs. So it doesn't really matter what the content is. These skills are going to help with any type of training content. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about each of the 10 new skills and highlight the definitions for you. And you have these in your handout as well. So when we think about maker instinct, which came from sense making in the previous set of skills, let's think about us as human beings and all the things that we like to make. We naturally make things. We make food. We make friends. We make product. We make art. We make companies. We make lots and lots of things. The list goes on. So we as human beings have this natural inclination to make things. And this is without exception. There isn't anybody in the room who couldn't tell me something that they make, something that they're good at making. Okay, this is just a human factor. But what is maker instinct? Okay, it doesn't sound like a skill. It is a skill. It's the ability to exploit that inner drive that we all have to build and grow things, and at the same time connect with others in the making. So there's a collaborativeness to the maker instinct. It's not you sitting in a room thinking up a cool idea. It's making something with someone else or a group of someone else's. There's a collaborativeness to it. Now, I'm going to spend just a little bit more time on this particular skill than some of the others because this is sort of a foundational skill. Now, for those of us who were born in the United States, grew up in the United States, have lived most of our lives in the United States, the collaborative part is actually quite difficult. We would like to believe, I would like to believe, and I'm sure many of you would like to believe, that we are very collaborative. And probably to an extent we are, okay? It's been a skill that we have learned, and it's probably something that we like. But our culture, so when we just think about global communications, and we think about the global world and the differences in cultures, our culture is not a collaborative culture. So when we are in college, and let's just take someone in a master's degree, okay, program, and we're put in a situation, a group situation, okay, where we need to be collaborative and turn in an assignment as a group. What do we do in the United States? I'm going to do this part. You're going to do part 2. You're going to do part 3. And when we present, I'll present my part. You present your part. You present your part. One person will sort of put it all together. We all go to our corners. We all do our individual pieces, and we do them really well. We come back and we have a conversation about, how they align. But do we really sit down in a room and collaborate on each of those pieces? Okay, most people's heads should be going left to right, okay? Because we don't. That's not part of our culture. We live in a very individualistic culture. We still have the maker instinct. We still have the ability to exploit that inner drive. But the big piece for people who are part of the American culture is that connecting with others in the making. That is going to be the hardest part for people to do. People from some other cultures will also have that same problem. And then there are people, let's say if you're from Asia, where you live in a more collaborative society, a more collectivistic type of a culture. The connecting part is not going to be the hard part. The exploiting the inner drive part is going to be the hard part because of the hierarchical nature of that particular culture. So some of these skills also will need to be applied inside a given circumstance, and we need to take cultural differences into consideration. So spend a little bit more time on maker instinct because I want to just point out this is sort of a foundational skill for all of the other skills. Now, clarity doesn't sound like anything too complicated. Okay, we just get clear, all right? However, clarity has to do with our ability to make sense of clutter. All of the things coming at us, all of the data that is available to us each and every day. And to be able to make sense of the clutter and to see through the messes and to see through the contradictions into a future that others may not be able to see. So as individual contributors in an organization, clarity is important. But as leaders in an organization, it's even more important because we need to be able to sort through everything and actually see out to a future so that we can say, hey, come on, everyone, follow me. I can see where we're going. Trust me. And so as leaders, we have to be able to make sense of that clutter. We have to know what's important to focus on, what's not important to focus on. Which opportunity makes sense for us to build, which opportunity doesn't make sense for us to build. So for those of us here that are idea generators, we have lots of ideas. That's fabulous. But there needs to be other people, for those of us here, who are good at sort of vetting out the ideas. We need to be able to say, hey, this idea makes sense because of these circumstances. This idea, doesn't make sense because of these circumstances. Or it makes sense but doesn't make sense right now, because we live in this world where we need to make fast decisions. So getting clear about the clutter in front of us, see through the mess and contradiction fast so that you can see the future that others may not be able to see yet. Let's talk about dilemma flipping. What else might we call dilemma flipping? Crisis management. What else? Anybody? Anybody thinking problem solving? Lots of people are nodding their head to problem solving. Okay, so crisis management is extremely important and problem solving is extremely important. Two very important skills to know. And I would put them more in that enduring leadership skill category or management skill category. Dilemma flipping, the difference between a dilemma and a problem is that dilemmas have no solutions. Problems have solutions, maybe even more than one solution. Dilemmas do not have solutions. Dilemmas exist and we need to make the best of the situation, make whatever decisions we need to make, and move forward with some sort of course of action, whatever that might be. It's our ability to turn these situations that have no solutions into advantages and opportunities. So the traditional skill of problem solving, although extremely important, it will not help with dilemma flipping. Dilemma flipping has to do with recognizing the situation and not trying to solve it like a problem. Because then you'll get into analysis paralysis because there's nowhere to go, because it's not a problem. And when you can't find a solution, it's typically because there is no problem. And so that's one of the ways to tell whether you're dealing with a problem or not. Because we're all very, very smart people. So if you really can't find a solution, it's not a problem. It might be a dilemma, which means you can't find a solution, but you can turn it into an advantage and an opportunity. And there's lots of ways that we can work on doing that. The next one has to do with immersive learning. Now, we wouldn't be here as individuals today if we didn't personally, individually value learning. We all value learning, okay? But immersive learning has to do with our ability to learn from unfamiliar environments in a first-person way. So unfamiliar environments is the first key part. How many people have been in a room like this before? We're all sitting in a lecture hall. Okay, everybody's raising their hand. This is not an unfamiliar environment because you all raised your hand. Now, there are people today on a simulcast. Many of them may have been on a simulcast before. Many of them may not have. If any of you have not been on one before, that would be an opportunity for you to put yourself in an unfamiliar environment. So the concept is very easy. You put yourself in an environment that you haven't been in before in order to learn. Why? Because we need to learn to adapt. So if we always put ourselves in a situation that we've been in before and that we know works for us, we're not learning to adapt. Because learning the skill of adaptation takes application. It is not something that you can just learn about. It is not something cognitive. It is not something conceptual. It is something that you actually must put yourself in the situation and apply at the time that you're doing it. So the ability to learn from unfamiliar environments is one step toward learning how to adapt. And then the first person way is really just getting at me putting myself in that situation, like a simulation kind of a thing, and being able to learn not second, third hand, not reading a book, for example. So immersive learning is extremely important. Bioempathy. Bioempathy will be very appealing to those of you who care a lot about the environment and who spend a lot of time thinking about biology and ecosystems and how organisms grow. So if you think about your organization as an organism instead of an organization, and you can see and have the ability to see things from nature's point of view, to understand and respect and learn from nature's patterns, to see how things learn and how things die, how things expand and how things contract. What do you do when something gets too much water? What do you do when something gets too much sun? So if you're thinking about sun and water and the way in which the ecosystem works, and then put that inside your organization. What do you do when something gets too much emphasis? What do you do when something gets not enough emphasis? So that's a way to take bioempathy and take terms from ecology and biology and put them into organizational terms, okay? So think about all the patterns in nature. Think about who eats who in the environment, okay? And correlate that to competition, okay? So there's a way to learn from nature and the patterns in nature, okay? So if you think about, does the little guy always eat the big guy in the environment? Okay, most of the time, not, okay? Most of the time, the predator is the big guy eating the little guy. But think about the flower or the plant that has a stinging mechanism, this one beautiful flower that if you touch it can hurt you. So you can learn that not only do the big guys eat the little guys, but the little guys can have some very unique weapons, if you will, or strategies in business to compete with or to collaborate with the big guys. So again, I'm just trying to give you ideas and ways to think about bioempathy. Bioempathy is probably, of the 10 skills, one of the hardest for people to kind of wrap their head around in terms of, well, how do I make this apply in my organization? The next one has to do with constructive depolarizing. The ability to calm tense situations where communication has broken down, and to bring people together, bring people from divergent cultures or divergent viewpoints toward constructive engagement. Now, this is not about negotiating. This is not about agreement, okay? Although those two things are important and would be considered enduring management and leadership skills, it's not about negotiating an agreement. This is about the ability to calm a tense situation so that people can engage. The key words are constructive engagement. And so this skill is about constructive engagement. It's not about solving the problem. It's not about mediation. It's not about negotiation. All of those things are important, but they have nothing to do with constructive depolarization. Constructive depolarizing has to do with calming the tense situation. Quiet transparency. Now, the concept of transparency has been talked about a lot in leadership development journals over the last probably 5-6 years. I've seen a lot of studies on being a transparent leader. Well, what does a transparent leader really mean? It doesn't mean saying everything about everything that's going on in the organization, because what that will do is create more clutter, which then makes someone have to exercise that skill of clarity even more because they have to cut through all the clutter. So quiet transparency doesn't mean to like regurgitate everything that's in your head, but it does mean to have the ability to be open, honest, authentic about what matters most. What matters most to you without advertising yourself, what matters most to the people that you're talking to, what will matter most to them, and to be quiet about it. It's not about promoting yourself. It's about talking about what matters most, because people like to follow leaders that are taking them somewhere that they want to go. And if you talk about what matters most to you and you exercise being a human being in leadership, people will follow you more. And the measurement of whether or not you're a good leader or not, for the most part, there's just one thing. You basically kind of look around, kind of see who's following you. If nobody is following you, there might be a problem with your leadership skills. That to me is the basic measurement of whether or not you're being a good leader. And quiet transparency is one of those skills that can really help people want to follow you. You cannot make people follow. They have to follow them on their own, follow you on their own. Now this next skill is actually my personal favorite skill, rapid prototyping. Okay, and this has been around for a long time. It just hasn't been talked about in the context of leadership development. So what rapid prototyping has to do with is the ability to create quick, early versions of an innovation, let's say a product, for example, with the expectation that later success is going to require early failures. Okay? How many people bought the first ever iPhone? How many people bought the second ever iPhone? The third ever iPhone? How many people have an iPhone today? Lots of people. I would call the iPhone a success, right? So when you put out a product that's not 100%, in the past, people would say, no, 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 it has to be the highest quality. It can't have any defects. It can't have any mistakes. We have to make sure it's perfect, okay? I'm sure that many of you know this, but if not, I think it's really, really important, so allow me to share with you that perfection is not something we can strive for. Being perfect is not attainable. And what happens when we strive to be perfect is we are constantly disappointed. So I never tell a 5-year-old. I never tell my 5-year-old that I want her to be perfect. First of all, she was born perfect, okay? But I never strive for perfection personally, and I never ask anybody who works for me, who works with me, to strive for perfection. First of all, it's not attainable. Second of all, you're constantly disappointed. And third of all, you won't be successful because rapid prototyping says you have to have early versions of things, not necessarily failures, just early versions, so that you can learn from them to make it that next step better. So rapid prototyping happens to be one of my favorite things. I spent a lot of my career actually fast-tracking projects because of rapid prototyping. I like the idea of getting something out there for people to use and people to test with the expectation that they will have access to the upgrade. So you don't make them pay extra for the upgrade, but get it in the hands. This is beyond piloting and beta testing. The next one is smart mob organizing. And this has to do with the ability to create and engage with and nurture purposeful networks, change networks, through intelligent use of current media. So whatever media is available to us today. So for those of you sitting in the room who don't use any type of social media at all for yourself personally or in your business, I think that homework step number 1 that should be on your handout should be something like open a Facebook account or open a Twitter account or get on LinkedIn. Something that allows you, or any other, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of social media sites. Something that allows you, order something online. If you've never ordered something online, go do it. Do it immediately, okay? Because that's the wave of the future, okay? Now, for those of you who do use social media in your personal life or in your business life, now the challenge has to do with, well, how do I leverage this social media to help myself and to help others? So the best example of smart mob organizing would be Wikipedia, okay? How many people have been on Wikipedia? Okay, lots of people are raising their hand. Now, I would say that, when I was working on my doctoral dissertation, I couldn't cite Wikipedia, okay? But I used Wikipedia, if I came across a word I didn't know, to be sort of my first source to just give me a general idea of what it was. Then I needed to go back and find a peer-reviewed journal, scholarly research, and cite a real source, okay? But Wikipedia is by far the best example of smart mob organizing. The idea behind Wikipedia, for those of you who are not familiar with it, was someone's brainchild idea around wanting to create an online encyclopedia that would have everything. No matter what you want to know, it would be there, and that it would be accessible to everybody. Okay, that is smart mob organizing, because not one person sat in a room and typed up all the definitions. Even today, Wikipedia, each of us in this room can contribute to Wikipedia. Wikipedia is based on everybody around the world contributing to the definitions and holding each other accountable for making sure that it is accurate. It's a great example of smart mob organizing. Now, commons creating takes that even one step further. This is the ability to seed and nurture and grow shared assets. Shared assets is key, that benefit others and then heightens our competition. Well, this kind of says we want more competition. Well, we do want more competition, okay? Now, in the past, we might have been thinking, we want to be ahead, we want to be ahead, we want to be ahead. Today, we want there to be lots and lots of competition. The more competition, the more opportunities to collaborate, the more opportunities to learn, the better our organization will be, the better the next organization will be, which will cause our organization to be even better. So it just keeps going and going and going and going. It's nonstop. So joint ventures would be the thing that could come out of commons creating. And joint venture innovations, it's sort of like joint venture innovations on steroids. That's what commons creating is really all about. So for those of you, and this does not have to be company to company, this can be inside a company. It could be one department partnering with another department to create something that will be better than if one department did it on their own. Okay, so it doesn't have to be, you know, a company in the United States and a company somewhere else creating some joint venture product together. So commons creating is the very last step in this process. So sort of to wrap up everything that we've been talking about, each of these skills that we've just been talking about, I can talk all day about each of these skills, and I would love to, but you know, we don't have that much time together today. So you know, what does it take to thrive in this VUCA world? So the first thing that we need to do is understand, and I would say accept, the nature and the essence of VUCA. Okay, so for those of you who knew about VUCA, great. And for those of you who, you know, this was your first opportunity to be introduced to it, your first step is to really think about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and what that means. And to think about it in a way that does not get you to uncertainty paralysis, okay? Think about all the opportunities that can come from learning to live and learning to adapt quickly. Speed and adaptation are the two key things in our VUCA world. What will help us do that is recognizing today's drivers of change. If you are not familiar with those drivers of change that we talked about, getting familiar with those, understanding them. And I don't mean making a study out of it. I just mean accepting that technology tomorrow will look different than today, which means we need to understand it. We need to help our learning communities within our organizations understand it. Evaluate that and make sure you know what that means inside your individual organization. We talked about 5 leadership development trends. Well, to thrive in today's VUCA world and tomorrow's VUCA world, we need to evaluate those leadership trends against what we're doing inside our organization. Now, if you leave today and do nothing, I am going to feel like this was a failure. We need to have at least one nugget, something that you say, this spoke to me and this is something that makes sense inside my organization. And remember, pace, the speed and adaptation are 2 very, very important things. So if you're overwhelmed, okay, I was hoping this would be provocative, but not overwhelming, okay? If you're overwhelmed and you do nothing, that's not going to help you survive and thrive in the VUCA world. So you've got to find at least one thing. And then, of course, developing new skills. So I did a research study that looked at those 10 new skills. I looked at an executive level audience. And the executive level audience, I looked at 2 things. One, what was their perception on the importance of those skills related to strategic objectives, and how they felt the importance was related to sort of their tactical, urgent matters. And then I also looked at how many had integrated any or all of the 10 skills into their leadership development programs, and then to what extent they anticipated integrating those skills in the future. So that was what the study was about. So the reason I bring that up is to share with you that not all 10 skills are going to be important to you in your organization today. So what's important is to kind of take a look at them and not pick the easy skill, not say, clarity, because I understand what it means, but to take something else that really speaks to an issue or a situation in your organization, or speaks to a strategy moving forward, or speaks to an innovation you've been thinking about and don't know how to get there. Pick one of the skills and make that one of the skills that you begin to focus on and integrate into your enduring leadership development programs. So focusing on these 10 new skills is not either or. It's not like stop everything you're doing and now let's focus on these 10 skills. It's selecting what makes sense for you in your organization. This is just a little bit of information about me should you want to connect with me at any time. I do use LinkedIn. That's one of my personal social media things. So please feel free at any time to reach out to me. I love to have conversations about what's happening in other people's organizations and learning from them. Learning to learn and learning to adapt and building your network is something that's extremely important to me. Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this morning's session.